Hello, everyone, and this is my cultural audit Feminism in Japan. The cultural field is feminism in Japan and specifically how it has shaped its culture and changing its contemporary society. Japan has a unique, fascinating culture that is unlike any other countries. What makes it so distinctive is it is a combination of traditional and modern. On one side, Japanese culture is immersed in a rich history and deep traditions in its culture dating back thousands of years. On the other, Japanese society is one that is in a continual state of rapid change and is continuously evolving with new trends in fashion, technology, and pushes the boundaries of what is possible. Japan is now one of the planet's most advanced, affluent, and democratic countries. But in one key respect, it has remained stubbornly regressive, and that is Japanese women and gender equality in the nation. Feminism in Japan has existed since at least the late 1800s. Those were the earliest records of feminism ever existing in the country, and women in every decade have fought for their rights and against gender specific traditions. But it wasn't until 1970 that this really became a movement. This was the year when hundreds of women marched through the streets of Tokyo, an occasion that is often referred to as the birth of women's liberation movement in Japan. The movement, called Umanribu, which literally translates to women's lib from Japanese, was eventually adopted by women who embraced the concept of feminism. It meant that women were enabled to fully evolve as a woman, follow their own passions without being limited to the socially prescribed roles as wives and mothers. Instead of being applauded for their achievements, however, the media continued to label feminists as unattractive, hysterical women, which has become deeply ingrained into the culture today, a negative image that persists. Feminism is not only needed for women, but also for the men of Japan. The fact that Japanese fathers in contemporary urban households spend so much time at work, and the company demands on them are so great, it means that they often really have very little time or energy to spend with their children. And so, not only does the responsibility for raising children, overseeing their education, and taking care of the house fall onto the mothers, but fathers themselves are absent and removed from the children's lives. The number of times a week that children in Tokyo ate dinner with their fathers present is extremely low. It is an extraordinarily high percentage of children who reported that they never ate dinner with their father present, except on weekends or special occasions. While this number is slowly bettering through with the modern age, it is still tragically and unacceptably low. It is common for the mother to bear the full responsibility for raising children, overseeing their education, and also managing the family's finances. This puts a heavy strain on Japanese women and also a strain on the relation between the mother and the child. The expectations on women's roles in contemporary urban life really mean that most women can't work outside the home. They're responsible for the education of their children. They're responsible for managing the household. And they may, in some cases, have responsibilities for aging parents. And so, culturally, as well as just in terms of the allocation of time, a woman is expected upon marriage to essentially give up her career and devote herself full time over the next 15 or 20 years to raising children and all of the other household responsibilities that appear. So that occasionally you find women who do attempt to have a career outside the home, but it is very difficult. This is incredibly unfair because women are forced to make the choice between having children or having a career. It is also unfair to men because they are expected to do the complete opposite. While they are expected by their parents and by society to marry and have children, to have a family, but still dedicate their life to their work. It's completely normal for men to never spend time with their families. As a result, they need to work unbearable hours and rarely have any time to spend with their children and wife. One of the stresses for the contemporary Japanese urban family has to do with questions of care of the aged. There are many stresses on the mother's world already, but now that Japan has become a so-called graying society, in which the proportion of the aged is rising more rapidly than in any other industrialized nation, the fact that social policy for the aged has not developed very far results in the expectation that Japanese women will be the ones to care for their elderly parents or the parents of their husbands. This puts an extra burden on the already stressful life that Japanese women face within the family, given that they are already expected to bear nearly the full responsibility of raising their children, their education, their family finances, and so on. Not only do women have heavy burdens in terms of their children's education, but as long as society does not have a social welfare system that provides for the independent living and care of the elderly, many Japanese women at some point in their lives are going to find themselves having to take care of their elderly relatives, their own parents, or their husband's parents. And so again, the social realities of life don't permit women, in many cases, to get outside the home to pursue an independent career. So a woman is expected to put everyone's life ahead of theirs, ahead of their dreams and hopes. Japan is one of the fastest aging populations, a problem that the government has put pressure on to fix. As a result of this huge gap in family culture, it trickles down to the general work norms as well. The discrimination women face in the workplace is still very prevalent. A small number of women managers is incorporated into this system. Those who successfully prioritize their jobs over their personal and family lives. Not taking women seriously in day-to-day operations in the office and sexual harassment are still very much alive. There is even a thing called marahara, short for maternity harassment, in which women are harassed to quit their jobs because they have become pregnant. Bosses and managers are afraid that pregnant women or new mothers will not be as productive in the workplace. Not only is this detrimental to women's health, but it can also cause immense stress that results in miscarriages and premature births from the amount of pressure on their mental and emotional well-being. There is no legal definition of this abuse and no laws fighting it. 60% of women in Japan leave their job once they get pregnant with their first child, and 40% return to their job after maternity leave. This furthers the gender equality gap that is already very prevalent in the Japanese workforce. A growing number of young women are remaining unmarried in Japan today, a development often viewed as a rebellion against the traditional confines of women's restrictive roles as wives and mothers. While it's great that women are starting to be more independent on their own, it is incredibly tragic that the price they have to pay is not being able to have a family. And some women do want both, but in reality, in Japan reality, they can only choose one. The Japanese business system prioritizes the lifelong employment of male workers in order to sustain that stereotype and that social norm that the male breadwinner family model and insider-oriented management, and to stabilize industrial relations. Workers are expected to devote themselves to one company, working long hours in exchange for rigid age-based promotions and pay. The culture of long working hours intensifies suspicion and serves as a physical and mental test for those women who challenge the firm boundary between the sexes that exist in the Japanese workplace. Japan has one of the worst records in the world for female political representation, with women holding just over 9% of seats in the lower house of parliament, The nation ranks 165 out of 193 countries recorded. In the proportion of women in its national legislature and among the world's richest countries, it comes in last. The barriers for women entering political life in Japan are many. Many political machines often favor long-standing relationships with men, and women face scrutiny from the news media and the public that focuses on personalities and looks rather than political accomplishments. In the previous election alone, the news media has pounded several female candidates for extramarital affairs, including a woman whose husband was the one who cheated. Political experts say it is difficult to find enough women to run for office, even though women are just as educated as men, and female participation in the workforce is relatively high. Those with leadership potential may not want to leave workplaces where they fought so hard to advance. Some women say they would rather put their energy into changing the Japanese work culture to allow employees more flexible hours and to structure jobs around projects rather than timesheets. Steps that could be helpful to women, especially mothers. Gender differences in spoken Japanese used to be very pronounced, but recently, over the past 30 years or so, they have become much more subtle as the language has evolved. What's happened is that young women have gradually adopted a more gender-neutral form of speaking. Their speech does still have some characteristically feminine aspects, but those aspects are much fewer and more subtle than they are in the speech of older women. Distinctively masculine speech, on the other hand, is still very much alive and well. It's mostly used by men speaking to other men, who often switch to a more gender-neutral style when speaking to women. However, some aspects of what was once strictly masculine speech have now become more commonly used by young women and girls as well. Basically, there are now 3 different types of colloquial Japanese speech. The first is traditional feminine speech, which is now only used by women in their 40s and older. The second is modern feminine speech, which is used by women and girls in their 30s and younger. And the third is masculine speech, used mostly by men and boys of all ages. The first one is quite distinct and unique, but the differences between the latter two seem to be growing more and more blurred as the language of young people continues to change. This can be attributed to being in a more globalized society, a more modern society, and the age of social media, where everyone seems to be equal and therefore speaks the same and has the same linguistics. Since the implementation of the Equal Employment Opportunity Law in 1986, the largest increase in female labor participation has been in the sector of part-time jobs. For women who are rejoining the workforce after taking some time off it to raise their children, this means that they disproportionately obtain jobs with lower salaries and precarious contracts. Motivated by the situation and the argument that more diversity in leadership positions leads to better management and more competitiveness, Prime Minister Abe has been encouraging companies and governmental agencies to create alternatives for women's career advancement and has called this womenomics. This aspect of womenomics mainly consists of campaigns and incentives for companies to promote more women to managerial positions, to adopt internal gender inclusiveness quotas, and to disclose information regarding the share of female employees in different positions. The goal set for this element of the policy is to achieve 30% of leadership positions for women by 2020. Yuriko Koike has even recently become the first female governor of Tokyo. The government aims to achieve diversity by expanding the role of women and creating an embracing environment in the workplace. It calls for businesses to change work styles built on traditional values. While the number of women joining the workforce increased by more than 1.5 million from 2012 to 2016, and women in management positions in the private sector approaches 10%, continuing to lessen the burden of working parents and accelerate women's promotion remains a key objective. This, along with changing men's consciousness, encouraging the dynamic engagement of women, and supporting female entrepreneurs is crucial in order to realize a society in which all women can take on challenges at any stages in life. And these are my recommendations. These are my references. And the following is my annotated bibliography. Feel free to pause if you would like to read more on each one. These were great sources. And that is my cultural audit. Thank you for listening.